Hi everyone, welcome to Brick and Block. This is episode number 3 and I'm very, very happy to introduce Alex from Nikjoo Architects.
Hello.
Hey Alex.
Hey, how's it going, Pradumn?
Very well, thank you. Thank you very much for making the time today to join me. You've been on my list to actually talk to for a long time, and one of the things, I mean, we've obviously known each other for a while, but when we used to work together a couple of years ago, you know, you had what I think was quite a fledgling practice, right? You know, with like sort of 1 or 2 projects, and that really over the last couple of years has really sort of blossomed into a lovely sort of array of work. I mean, I think when we first got introduced to each other, I think you were probably did you have the artist studio house done by then?
I don't think that was finished at that point, but it was a sort of one of those startup projects where, you know, amazing to get the opportunity to work on this historic building and work with an amazing client to develop this chapel. It's a sort of home/art gallery, but fees were really not where they should have been. Business side of the whole architecture practice was definitely behind. So, you know, I had to work at other practices whilst doing that moonlighting, as you would say, on it. And that was, you know, allowed me to build the practice up, which is, you know, I think for anyone who's wanting to start, a really good way to do it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I remember you were sort of really keen to sort of develop it. I mean, taking a step back, I guess, because let's face it, every architect's dream is to own their own practice, to, you know, design their own buildings. What made that trigger for you to go, you know what, actually, you know, a little bit of freelance here or there, actually this could turn into a practice? What was the sort of turning point for you?
Yeah. It's really hard to pinpoint it on one thing, but I think I got lucky with being given the opportunity to work on the chapel. Of course, you know, I had done a lot of smaller projects, little back extensions and helping out. And the owner at the time ran a chain of salons. So I was helping out with the planning and the interior design and that type of thing. And that was sort of one step led to another. And I just have really loved working on all sides of the practice. So that's from, you know, winning the clients, getting the work in, thinking about through the concept design and delivering that side of what we do through to the technical knowledge. It's what I will sometimes found in practice when I was working there was you kind of got pigeonholed into doing a type of role within the practice. So it totally makes sense because it's a component team effort, isn't it? Any sort of larger project particularly. But running your own practice, you are just taking care of every side of it until the point where you can start, you know, getting some people to help you. But even then, I think you're still really mindful of every part of the projects, the company, and the sort of how everything you do impacts on it.
Yeah, I guess what's probably quite nice. I mean, obviously, since we first got introduced to each other to now, I think you've built up quite a nice sort of range of work, haven't you? It's not actually just resi. You've done a bit of retail work. You've done a bit of education, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yes. Yeah. Worked on a school many years ago now, but yeah. So it's, I would say, predominantly resi work. Private resi is what the sort of the backbone of the practice is. And that's, you know, our belief is that everyone should live and be within great spaces. And that's sort of one of the whys behind the practice. And that's, but being able to work on the retail stuff alongside it is really great because you can test ideas and the time scales are really short in retail work. So the latest one we did was a pop-up for the Boiler Room, which is great. You know, what a cool brand. And it was a week before they were like, right, we're doing this pop-up. We got a week. We got this budget. What can we do? And that was, you know, everything had to go really fast. terms of the design, getting the builders in, getting it manufactured, getting it set up. Everything was all done within a week. Contrasted to one of the homes I'm working on at the moment in Gospel Oak, which is 2 years in planning, maybe. Who knows how long it's going to take, but it's a long time to actually get it built. So it's nice to sort of have those two parallel streams running together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that must be quite nice. I guess I would probably liken it to something like a pitch, right? What we would do in the sort of commercial world and trying to do that.
I did see that. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's really cool to actually do a quick turnaround. I mean, a week is very quick, though.
Everything else kind of got parked for that week.
It's like, I've got to do this.
Yeah.
No, that's really amazing. I mean, one thing that was really interesting, we were sort of talking off air before that you've actually turned your practice, and then you've also developed another sort of side project, Balance.build. I mean, this is about a payment side of software, right?
Yeah, it is. So a big problem that I have encountered and continually do encounter is the payment side of construction, particularly on the smaller scale domestic work, where often maybe there isn't an architect or a sort of professional consultant to oversee the financials, and it's left to a matter of trust between builder and customer, which is great if it's there, but we all know that that does break down, and that's where the problems arise. What was actually agreed, what's actually been done, and how much should have been paid. These are all simple things which cause major problems. And so myself and two other co-founders have been working on developing an app to simplify this, basically, Balanced. And effectively what you do is, once you agree the work which is happening, you would sort of copy it into the app and what each portion of work costs. And for every start of that sort of stage, the client will upload the money, and then it's held in a secure escrow account, allowing the customer to know that, well, they're paying the money out, but it's not actually being paid to the builder until the work's done. So once the work's done, the builder says, right, here's the pictures. Can you please release it? And then that money is released to the builder. And likewise for the builder, he knows that, or she, of course, knows that, well, if I do the work, I'm going to get paid. Because the big fear for, I think, both customers and builders is customers are really scared of getting ripped off. Builders are really scared of not getting paid. And there's a lot of mental health issues with contractors surrounding that, in terms of, losing money and not having the ability to take people to court and so on.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a common problem. I've got so many family friends who've wanted to do extensions, and they've sort of asked me, how do you set this up? And I've always pointed them towards like a very simple JCT, small work sort of contract. I'd say, look, make sure you get something in place, and make sure you do some due diligence on the contractor that you're actually getting on board. But the payment side of things, I think, is really tough to manage, unless you've got a really good relationship, as you mentioned. It can really sort of make or break a project, right?
Totally.
It's not like probably what I'm used to in the commercial world, where you would expect a builder to have a serious credit against his account where they can go away and make orders and then get paid. Sometimes some of these builders don't necessarily have that ability, right? So they need that comfort, I guess, don't they? And reassurance that they will get paid. And likewise, as you quite rightly said, the customer needs to be sure that they're going to do the right job. They can hold something against them. So I think it's a brilliant idea. I mean, how old is the software right now?
So we are, Brexit has caused a little bit of a turmoil, I would say, in terms of how payments processed and regulation.
Yep.
And so we are not live currently. It's still going through a bit of a regulatory process. So in the sort of this year, we should go live. And it's also useful to think of this as this isn't a new idea. Escrow
Mm.
payments are used in infrastructure projects and really large scale works where the sums of money are so vast that they have to use escrow. But why shouldn't Joe Bloggs use it? Why shouldn't they use it on a
Yeah.
much smaller scale project? And what we're doing is hopefully adding transparency and fairness to projects and making sure that everyone just gets what they're due.
Yeah. So do you set it up so that the projects, it's almost like stage by stage, foundations, walls, that sort of thing? Or do you go to the nth degree of understanding like materials and swapping all that sort of stuff out?
There's full flexibility. So you as a customer and your builder can decide the
Mhm.
granularity of what you're going to pay for and at what stage you're going to pay for it. We of course give suggestions of what industry standards would be and probably should be
Mm.
followed. But at the end of the day, it's sort of up to you and your builder how you make that agreement.
Yeah. I mean, I can, I can definitely see this being a very useful tool actually, because I mean, when as I said before, I've pointed family friends
Mm.
to, contracts or whatever it might be. But when they've also said, how do I manage the money or arrangements, this is actually quite a nice way of saying, well, actually use something like this because it makes it really easy for yourself and the contractor.
Mm.
And there's no ambiguity then, is there? I mean, I think that's half of it, isn't it? It's that communication, that line of
Exactly. Yeah.
communication to ensure that you're both on the same page. It's going to cost, I don't know, 20 grand to get the foundations in for this extension. You've got that money in, or it's whatever it might be.
Yeah.
You know,
I think
I think that,
that's where all the problems arise is just transparency and understanding. There's conversations which you thought you had said or you were clear, but the other person wasn't,
yeah,
and they don't mean to be, cause a problem and so
yeah,
on, but they do. So using something like balance would hopefully eliminate a lot of those issues.
yeah, and probably a lot better than, I mean, I remember my parents doing their extension many years ago whilst I was doing my part two,
Mm.
and I remember my dad typing it out on a Word document, just going, okay, I'm gonna pay this much for this much for that, or just sort of signed off. It was a bit old school, but
Yeah.
something like this is just makes it a bit better, doesn't it? um, so just sort of tying back to Nikjoo, your
Mm.
practice, um, you've mentioned, obviously we talked about the fact that, you've got a varied group of projects now. It's been evolving over the last few years. Where do you, what's your general view on the climate change scenario so I guess what your view is and perhaps where you feel your practice sort of stands on it?
Mm. It's the greatest issue facing humanity. I think it's such an important thing which architects have a small but very impactful role. When it comes to a building, there's so many stakeholders involved: clients, financial funds, governments, the contractors. Everyone has a role. They're all, on different varying degrees of scale. But I think architects have such an important role within all of that because they have the ability to alter the direction of the project, whether that's pushing for greener technologies, if that's building in a more sustainable manner. You know, we can we can put those ideas at least into the sphere and into the projects. And, if they don't
Mm,
stick, well, then that's maybe an issue with the client or with the costs of things and so on. But at least you can have an impact. But yeah, I think as a practice, we always try to look for the most environmentally friendly solutions. But of course, unfortunately, often they cost more. And these homes, there are often finite budgets. And if
mm,
the most common response I get, because we always talk about this as part of the sort of early stage concept work, asking clients, what do they want? How important is sustainability to them? And no one says
mm.
it's not important. but they
Yeah.
all say, but if it costs more, I probably don't want to go for it because I want to buy those nicer tiles, or I want to buy
Yeah.
that lovely whatever it is. And so there's different ways you can sort of use that and push with it. So either it's designing using a more environmentally friendly material, whether that's
Mm.
timber structure or timber internal finishes, whatever that might be. There's many options. Recycled materials. Um, that That's sort of a good way, I think, that we try to push environmentally friendly design.
Have you, in sort of, say, let's just talk about the last sort of couple of years. It certainly feels
Sure.
like, for me, certainly that um, sort of pre-COVID, there was a general conversation, but for some reason, COVID happened, and then it sort of changed. Something sort of switched, and everyone was really big in a big, big effort. Certainly on the wellness side of things,
Mm,
but certainly sustainability, we're talking about that more and more. And whether it's, quantity of air or whether it's thermal efficiencies,
mm.
are you noticing, perhaps there's two or three things that are trending in terms of, I don't know if trending is the right word, but quite common on projects that you're working on? So, I mean, for me, I'm thinking, for a client, what are the key things that they're looking at? Is it thermal efficiencies? Heating bills are skyrocketing right now.
Mm.
Is that a big thing? Or is it, well, actually, I want to get as much daylight in as possible. So they're looking at maximal efficiencies of, the performance of those windows, perhaps. Is there certain things that you're noticing that are sort of coming through on a few projects?
I often find that general small scale resi clients probably aren't informed enough about the different points which can be sort of tackled. So that's
Mm,
where, I say, architects have an impactful role is we can say, well, it's going to cost you a little bit more now to improve your U values and get better
mm.
insulation, but your savings are going to be better. That's a fact. And over the long term, you're planning to live in this home forever, decades. It will have a meaningful impact on your sort of your pocket. After whatever the outlay time is. Um,
Yeah.
on the other hand, I've had a really great client. So the Watson Street Chapel, it got sought, it got bought by a new family who are there. They are very keen on environmentally friendly living. And so what we've done last year was to fully upgrade its environmental solutions to sort of the maximum you can do. So I was insulating it as far as it's practical, adding air source heat
Hmm.
pumps and solar panels. And we're waiting for the data, but early signs are that it's really significantly reduced their carbon outlay,
Oh,
but
wow.
also their financial outlay. So that's sort of, you do get some clients who are more tuned in, but they are less common, I find.
That's really interesting because I certainly don't hear much about what we would call stage 7
Mm,
information, where you get that post occupancy feedback and that data to actually understand, actually, is there value in it? Because obviously PVs, I think we're all fairly familiar
mm,
with the whole electric car scenario. Lots of people are actually putting them in either to, supplement their hot water, or actually now I've got a friend of mine who's just bought an electric car.
mm.
He's got actually a good amount of solar panels. He's now getting free electricity for his car. He's not paying for electricity
Great.
to run
Yeah.
his car now, which is great, right? So I think I would probably say that the clients are probably tuned to that level at the very minimum. But air source heat pumps, I think not everyone will probably go to it as a first point of call.
Mm.
So it's really interesting that, they've gone for that and they're actually interested in it. I mean, surely that the investment for that must be quite expensive, but I guess it's the education process to explain to them, actually it will have a greater output later on.
Yes. but alongside that, we are also being forced by government policy to put in things such as air source heat pumps, with boilers being made redundant in, I think it pushed it back to 2035. But we're working on a new project in Camden at the moment, and
Hmm.
we've had to put an air source heat pump in, which is great, you know. So that's where
Yeah.
another another piece of the whole construction development puzzle is pushing towards more environmentally friendly solutions, which I think has to be within reason, but something like that is definitely valuable.
Is that, is it specifically about air source heat pumps, or is that a local authority based policy?
Carbon reduction. So the
Carbon
policy
reduction.
is
Okay.
to reduce the carbon beyond the baseline by 10%, and the solution for that site was to use air source heat pump alongside insulation. PV wasn't a option just because of the orientation of the building. So it's sort of using the right technology for the right site.
Do you think that you're going to have this conversation more and more with your clients across your projects in the, say, in the next 5 to 10 years,
A-
where
Absolutely,
you're
yeah.
going to have to sort of put those things forward? And I mean, obviously when we work together at Barcazettas, we obviously, we're quite lucky to have like mechanical
Mm.
consultants and all these sustainability consultants. How do you, I presume it's going to be a bit trickier where in the smaller scale projects, you don't necessarily may not have like a complete wide range of team. Do you have to be quite selective about who you pull in and get that advice from?
You do, but I think it's something which contractors are more aware of today and than they were even
Mhm.
5 years ago. And they know who they, if it's a contractor design portion, which, let's be honest, a lot of these things become, because consultants can't be afforded at the early stages by the clients. They the contractors have their own teams who they can go to, and they understand that these are, and they're not new technologies anymore, right? PVs have been around for,
Yeah.
for decades. Air source heat pumps are a really common technology. They're much more familiar with them, and they are just getting more and more used to installing them and actually expecting to install it. I think, which is definitely a positive thing.
No, that's really interesting to hear and quite encouraging
Mhm.
actually. My one of my family friends who are actually doing an extension right now, they've introduced sort of they haven't gone down the SLC paths, but they're definitely looking at PVs. They've got some heating, cooling going on as well, but I think budgetary wise, they're like, okay, I'd really like this, but right now I'm going to hold fire and then add it in later. And I think that's probably something that people will look to more and more by retrofitting a lot of their
Yeah.
technologies into their houses, which I think is quite interesting. I remember about sort of specifically about fabric upgrades. I remember when I was back at Nottingham Trent, um, one of the lecturers, they were so big on retrofitting back then,
Mm.
but it was about retrofitting externally. So it was about insulation and render on the outside. Um, Whereas I think that's still an option, but I think a lot of it we're now looking at possibly internally with high performance insulation
Mm.
blankets or insulation boards. We did that recently on a project at Bargazettas for Holbein Gardens where we looked at you know commercially NIA gain and loss. So we didn't want to lose too much, so we explored that.
A big clincher is because commercial clients definitely don't want to lose NIA, but similarly,
No,
no do homeowners. You know, if you're
yeah,
telling them their bathroom is now going to only fit a smaller bath,
yeah,
then maybe not. And insulating outside is often not an option, particularly as there's so many
mm,
conservation areas in London and UK in general. It is a tricky area, and there's no one solution for all of it. That's why I think you've got to You've got to look sort of holistically at the problem and find the right solution for the right project.
Yeah, that's really encouraging to hear actually, because um, I find that there are some practices definitely out there that will sort of do the same things
Mhm.
or will recommend the same things. And I think it is important to, have a wide range of tools that you can sort of say, well, actually for this, for this project, it might be better to do this or whatever. And I think that's an important approach to have. Otherwise, you can't just do a blanket approach, can you? Which doesn't really true. I mean, one thing I was going to ask was, have you explored um, sort of on the structural side, using more sustainable materials like timber? Is that something
Mm.
that you've been doing?
Yes, yeah, that's definitely the way construction of new dwellings is going, and even extensions. Um, Probably, I think it will. Don't get me wrong, it already is there in the commercial world. CLT
Mm,
homes, CLT offices, but their NIA, their net internal area, is always the clincher on these things because
yeah.
timber has to get bigger. But just sort of stepping backwards quickly before talking about timber buildings, this could be a really interesting use of AI, quite a simple algorithm to find, these are the parameters of the building that I want to improve. It's carbon credentials, and environmental credentials. What can we do? What could be used on this? That's not something,
Mm.
I don't know if that exists. Maybe it does, and sort of second or tenth to the idea, but that could be something that would be really interesting to look at.
It is, yeah, definitely. I was chatting to my previous guest, Ed Crump from Kingston.
Mm,
We were talking about AI, and we were saying that right now it's probably not where we'd like it to be as architects.
mm,
We'd like to sort of throw a couple of problems at AI and see if it could come up with a series of options. And we were talking about that in the episode where we were saying, could you say, I want this ratio of height and width, or this thickness, what is the impact of that? But we needed to be quite approachable, quite open,
mm.
rather than sort of quite codey based. And I think we're not there just yet. But it's definitely going to come, I think. Um, we want to be able to use software to help us create those solutions. You're right. I mean, it'd be amazing, right? If a client comes to say, look, I want a new build house, I want it to be super sustainable. What are my options? Do I go for timber? Do I go for a hybrid structure, steel and maybe a little bit of timber combined? Or do we go for, you know, a hay based, insulation
Mm.
wall and then it's going to be super, super thick? What are the options? I mean, what I, uh, well, a couple of years ago, when we started Holbein Gardens, we actually looked at sheep's wool and paper
Right.
and a few other things. But unfortunately, the resi market is much better for that rather
Mm.
than the commercial one because everyone's scared like hell about using it. Um, do you find that actually it's a little bit more creative, perhaps, in the residential market where you can actually play around with and be more experimental?
You definitely can be, and maybe even more so in the retail world because it's the scale
Mhm.
of project. So if it's a small installation, you can pave that material. You can see what happens with it. If it does actually work, maybe you're not going to get extensive data from it, but you can see that A, is it aesthetically working, and B, is it sort of doing all the other jobs you want it to be doing. And likewise, you can do that with residential work where you can get the backing because it's an owner's home. They can do effectively what they want in terms of
Mm.
within reason, of course, but what they do with it and how they build it. But you can test those ideas. And I think it's a really good opportunity to test new ideas, and whether it's materials, whether it's construction methods. It's just the scale allows you the freedom to do.
I totally agree with what you said there in terms of the R&D approach. We found some great success in the practice utilizing that most recently with one of our projects, Holborn Gardens. And I think it's really interesting because you can be quite creative with it. And it does lend itself to offering new ideas, I think, which is quite nice because otherwise you are doing the same things over and over again. How have you found that with perhaps using that R&D approach with projects that you're working on?
So we've been trying to take the ideas and concepts which are being developed at smaller scale, faster pace for mostly the retail projects, and then apply those to the residential schemes that we work on. Two examples which we're currently working on, one in North London, Gospel Oak, and the other one in Oxfordshire, in the countryside, are taking the use of timber, and specifically timber frame buildings, working with the structural engineer to develop a system where we are creating the most, as sustainable, low carbon building as is sort of feasible. Of course, you probably could go further, but with the time and cost constraints, there's a limit which you can reach, of course. But some of the projects we've been working on, different fabrication methods, different construction methods, those are fed into the construction and the design of these projects. They're both homes. One is for a new farmhouse. It's a family in Oxfordshire, and the other one is a development for a developer client that we work with in Gospel Oak, and the clients come at it from different points of view. So both are timber framed homes. One client, won't say which one, you'll have to guess. One of them was really up to going using timber frame. They understood the benefits of it, there was sort of the construction methodology behind it, and really backed the idea. Whilst the other client was a bit hesitant on it, they weren't so sure it would give them the performance that they wanted. And for a lifetime home, this is the home they're building, and they want it to last. And that was a really interesting realization of knowing, okay, well, you do these tests and you think you're onto something, but does your client actually buy into it? Can you do your sales pitch approach to allow them to really understand what it is you're selling for, a good building, also make a better world in terms of being a lower carbon building. And we just got some of the energy data back, and both homes have over 50% reduction in CO2 through the materials that they're using. And I think it's around 20% reduction in primary energy use through the construction build-up. So that's the fabric build-up and where the energy sources come from, renewable sources being used for those homes.
Oh, wow. So, that's really interesting. In terms of, sort of picking up on your last point there, in terms of the data, is that something that you yourselves have tried to calculate yourself, or are you sort of partnering with someone to do that calculation for you?
So we use a specialist energy consultancy to do that. Yep. It is quite complicated and it is a bit of a specialist area. So it's something which is needed from planning. So Part L requirements, most councils, if not all now, are requiring that, you submit some energy calcs as part of the application. And I think that's a really positive thing. And, so it's forcing the development world into going and, into greener buildings.
And do you think that by gathering the information and presenting it back to your clients, you can go, well, hey, by thickening up your walls, I appreciate you might lose a couple of mil or, a couple of centimeters of space, but you're going to improve your thermal efficiency by this much, or your EPC rate's going to go up by this, your heating costs. Do you think all of that data is helpful for clients, or do some people take it positively and some less so?
I think you need to understand your client and what drives them, what's driving their building. And then you need to understand how to present that data. So some clients will go, they'll take these SAP calculations and they'll research it and they'll understand what it is themselves. Other clients just not interested in that. And they just want to know, is my house going to be warmer if I add this insulation? Yes. Is it going to cost me more? Yes. Am I going to see savings in the future? Yes. Okay, I'll do it. It's a very linear line in that way. So you've really got to understand your client and what's driving their building, really.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because even in, I think in the commercial world, when we've tried to introduce new things, obviously it does come back to, how much does this cost and what am I getting back? And I've certainly felt that, through this R&D approach that we've been touching on, it does sort of feel that perhaps we as designers do need to be more informed. And I think you alluded to this earlier on when we talked about this, that we do need to be more informed. We do need to be able to explain to our clients, these are the options possible. And I think that it's something that we probably weren't doing perhaps more often than not in the past. And I think specifically that point is about sustainability and, specific, elements within the building. Because I think obviously we, as designers, we will help communicate design and what options there are. But I think this is a sort of special nugget, I think, of work that we're trying to now introduce into our ever expanding repertoire of advice.
Yeah.
And it's another thing, isn't it?
It's the sort of all encompassing world of being an architect, I suppose, where there's an option. You can deliver a building and it's perfectly functional and it looks all right and it meets all the building regulations. But, we've worked together. I know that that's not what you want to deliver. That's definitely not what I want to deliver. It's going a bit beyond. And the way to go beyond is to do those tests, to do R&D, to do it on the projects where the client, is willing to test these things out and take a little bit of a punt on it. Because they trust you and they trust that you've already, done the research behind it and they can back you as being able to deliver that. I think that's important. And I think that makes, good architecture as someone who is willing to keep testing those ideas and really, try and come to the forefront of new technology, new aesthetic, new architecture. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Before I ask you my final question, I wanted to ask you one more thing, actually. Have you found that in the last sort of couple of years, with sustainability coming through, that perhaps maybe 5 years ago, we would have given options to clients like, we would recommend you do this. Have you perhaps found a couple of areas in your projects that you're actually saying, as a default, we as a practice are now just going to by default specify this sustainable product?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So yes, and it's quite recent, I would say. So timber framed buildings are millennia old. Timber frame buildings are not new, but in the past sort of 200 years, if not more, the default has been to go to masonry. Brick buildings, Victorian buildings, they last a long time. They're very strong. They're very good. But from a ecology, carbon point of view, they're not so great, of course, because you're taking more out of the ground and all the energy it takes to fire those bricks and produce concrete and that type of thing is, not really the way that the future of building lies. I don't think. And the default now is to use timber. Of course, that depends on the scale of your building. Going up to the higher you go, the bigger the timbers have to become. So there is a bit of a balance there. So with both of these projects I mentioned, there is some steel involved in it and there is some concrete, but it's so much less than it would have been otherwise. And that's the positive thing. Okay. Could it be better? Possibly. Does the client's budget allow for it to be better? No. Okay. So, let's be realistic. It's as close as it can be within the constraints the project has. And that's the thing that we should always understand is it is client's money. So we have to be respectful of that.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's a default to go to timber is such a good thing, I think.
Yeah, that's really lovely to hear, actually. Which is a nice segue into my final question.
Sure.
If it's clients' money, obviously we do need to be respectful to that. But
Mm.
if money was no object for you, what's the one thing that you would actually implement to tackle climate change?
So I think it would be a really simple thing, which is incredibly difficult, and that is to insulate homes and insulate buildings, because it will not only reduce the amount of energy that's used to heat these homes and keep people warm, but also just makes people's lives better. So being in a warmer home, warmer space is just going to improve eh, the life of everyone on the country, the planet, and that's, I think, a very simple, but I understand very difficult thing to achieve.
It is definitely. I totally agree. I mean, it sounds quite silly, doesn't it? Like, oh, let's just put more insulation
Mm.
in and let's make it more readily available. But it genuinely is quite hard.
Yeah, no,
You
very
know,
hard.
whether
Yeah,
uh, whether to put. I think we mentioned before, if you put it on, you can't always put it on the external of a building because they're conservation
yeah,
areas.
yeah.
It changes the aesthetics. So unfortunately, clients have to think about internals. And if you're adding it internally, then you're losing space. So it's a real sort of grapple, isn't it, to balance that act of figuring out, do I want to warm a home? Of course, yes, I want to save my bills. But there's all these amazing space age NASA
That's it. That's exactly. Money's no
insulation
object, right?
blankets when money's no
Yeah,
object. So we've used it, but it's very expensive.
yeah.
So I'm very wary of that. But yeah, that I would love to see that. I genuinely would.
Yeah. Agreed.
But thank you so much for your time, Alex.
Thank you, Pradumn.
Really love talking to you. And for those of you who've been listening, thank you very much. And if you haven't, like, share, subscribe, and check out for the next one. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pradumn.
Cheers, Alex.